They called it scrap metal flying through space, when humanity's first warship limped into Galactic Council territory. The sleek, crystalline vessels of the Zephyrians laughed at our crude welding. The bioorganic ships of the Nexari recoiled at our primitive fusion engines. Even the ancient stone fleets of the Kovani dismissed us as barely evolved primates playing with fire. But there's something the Galactic Council never understood about humans. We don't just survive impossible odds. We thrive in them. We take their mockery, their condescension, their mercy, and we forge it into something they never saw coming. Because while they were perfecting their elegant technologies over millennia, we were learning the most dangerous skill in the universe: how to improvise when everything goes wrong. The Council thought they were granting us a small corner of space out of pity. They thought our ramshackle fleet was a joke. They thought humans would be grateful subjects, content to mine asteroids in the forgotten edges of their perfect galactic order. They were wrong. When Admiral Chen received the Council's ultimatum, surrender our independence or face total annihilation, she didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled that terrifying human smile that every predator recognizes, but no prey ever sees coming. Well, she told her ragtag fleet of converted cargo haulers and retrofitted mining ships, I guess it's time to show them what crude really means. What follows is the story of how humanity's garbage fleet taught the galaxy's greatest civilizations the most important lesson they'd ever learn. Never underestimate a species that learned to fight by fighting itself for 10,000 years. The bridge of the resilient Dawn shuddered as another micrometeorite struck the hull. Admiral Sarah Chen didn't even look up from the tactical display. Her flagship had been taking hits like that for 3 years now, ever since humanity cobbled it together from the remains of a destroyed cargo hauler and 2 mining platforms. The ship looked like it had been assembled by drunk engineers in a junkyard, and the Galactic Council's pristine vessels never let her forget it. Admiral, incoming transmission from the Zephyrian flagship Ethereal Wind, reported Communications Officer Martinez, her voice tight with suppressed anger. It's Ambassador Veltar again. Chen sighed. The blue-skinned Zephyrian had been graciously offering humanity surrender terms for the past 6 months. Each offer was worse than the last, but always delivered with that insufferable air of superiority that made Chen want to ram her crude human fist through his delicate crystalline features. On screen, she ordered, straightening her worn uniform. Around the bridge, her crew of 30-something humans tried to look professional, despite sitting in chairs that had been salvaged from 3 different vessels and consoles that sparked whenever someone pressed them too hard. Ambassador Veltar's elegant form materialized in the hologram, his silver robes flowing despite the lack of any visible wind. Behind him, the bridge of his ship gleamed like the inside of a jewel, all smooth curves and pulsing lights that seemed to respond to his thoughts. Chen had visited that bridge once during the initial negotiations 3 years ago. Everything was perfect, beautiful, and completely alien to human sensibilities. Admiral Chen, Veltar said in his melodious voice, the translation matrix making his words sound like music. I hope this communication finds you well, despite your challenging circumstances. Chen forced a smile. We're doing just fine, Ambassador. What can I do for you? I come bearing what I hope will be welcome news. The Galactic Council has met an emergency session regarding the human situation. After much deliberation, we have decided to extend our generosity once more. The Admiral felt her jaw clench. The human situation. As if 43 colony worlds and 2 billion people were just a minor administrative problem. Veltar continued, his tone becoming even more condescending. We understand that your species is young, impulsive. You lack the wisdom that comes with millennia of civilized development. Therefore, the Council has authorized me to offer humanity a final opportunity for peaceful integration. I'm listening, Chen said carefully. Complete disarmament of your fleet such as it is. Dissolution of your military command structure. Acceptance of Council oversight for all human colonies. In return, your people will be granted the status of protected junior species, with full rights to petition the Council for resources and guidance. Chen looked around her bridge. Her officers were trying to maintain professional expressions, but she could see the fury burning in their eyes. Protected junior species, the same status given to the Kalari after they'd been conquered 8 centuries ago. The Kalari were still considered junior and still required Council permission for everything from interstellar trade to having children. That's very generous, Chen said slowly. And if we refuse? Veltar's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his large, dark eyes. The Council has been more than patient, Admiral. 3 years of negotiations, 3 years of tolerating your species' aggressive expansion and crude military posturing. But patience, even enlightened patience, has limits. The hologram shifted, showing tactical displays of the space around human territory. Chen's breath caught as she saw the scale of what surrounded them. Hundreds of ships, thousands maybe. The graceful crescents of Zephyrian crystal ships, the organic curves of Nexari bio-vessels, the massive rectangular blocks of Kovani stone ships, and dozens of other alien designs from species she barely recognized. The combined Council fleet represents 47 member species, Veltar explained. Over 3,000 vessels accumulated over centuries of enlightened cooperation, technologies that your primitive minds cannot even comprehend. Weapons that could sterilize your worlds without leaving so much as a radioactive trace. Chen forced herself to keep looking at the display, even as her heart hammered in her chest. Humanity's entire fleet consisted of maybe 200 ships, most of them converted civilian vessels, with military systems bolted on wherever they would fit. The Council's flagship alone probably had more firepower than her entire task force. However, Veltar continued, his tone becoming gentle again, the Council has no desire for unnecessary bloodshed. We are not conquerors, Admiral. We are teachers' guides for younger species who have not yet learned to embrace peace over violence. Accept our offer, and your people will be welcomed into galactic civilization. Refuse. He didn't need to finish. The tactical display said everything. Chen closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of Earth, thinking of the colonies her species had carved out of the hostile void with nothing but determination and improvised technology. Thinking of the children who would grow up as perpetual subjects if she accepted, or who might not grow up at all if she refused. I need time to consult with my government, she said finally. Of course, the Council understands the gravity of this decision. You have 72 hours, Admiral. After that, I'm afraid the offer will be withdrawn. The hologram vanished, leaving the bridge in sudden silence broken only by the steady hum of overtaxed life support systems and the occasional spark from damaged consoles. Orders, Admiral? Asked Commander Torres, her tactical officer. His scarred hands were clenched on his console, and she could see the barely controlled rage in his face. Chen looked around at her crew. Martinez, who'd lost her husband in the Kepler 7 raid, Torres, whose son was serving on one of their frontier defense platforms, Lieutenant Brooks, whose sister commanded a patrol ship on the Outer Rim, all of them willing to die rather than watch their species become permanent children in someone else's galaxy. Signal the fleet, she said quietly. All ship commanders are to report to the Dawn for emergency conference in 6 hours, and get me a secure channel to Earth Command. Yes, ma'am. As her crew bent to their tasks, Chen stared at the tactical display, studying the overwhelming force arrayed against them. Any sane military commander would accept the Council's offer. Any rational person would recognize that fighting was suicide. But then, Chen thought with grim satisfaction, no one had ever accused humans of being entirely sane or rational. 3 hours later, she stood in the resilient Dawn's main briefing room, facing holographic projections of humanity's military leadership. Fleet Admiral Jackson on Earth, his weathered face showing every one of his 70 years. General Morrison from the Colonial Defense Force, her expression as hard as the asteroid fortresses she commanded. Admiral Reyes from the Border Patrol, looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. The situation is clear, Chen reported, having laid out the Council's ultimatum. They have us outgunned by at least 15 to 1, probably more. Their technology is generations ahead of ours. By any rational military assessment, resistance would be suicide. But, Jackson asked, knowing her too well. But they've made one crucial mistake, Chen continued. They think we're rational. She pulled up a different display, showing human space from a tactical perspective. Their 43 colonies formed a rough sphere about 30 light-years across, connected by trade routes and defended by a network of patrol stations and defense platforms. It looked pathetically small compared to the vast reaches of Council space. They've surrounded us, Chen explained, but they've also trapped themselves. Every Council species has been fighting according to the same principles for centuries. Elegant, efficient warfare between civilized opponents who follow established rules. They've never faced an opponent who was willing to break every rule in the book. What are you proposing? Morrison asked, though Chen could see she was already beginning to understand. Total war, Chen said simply. Not the polite, limited warfare they're used to. Real war. Dirty war, human war. She highlighted several points on the tactical display. Their fleet is designed for decisive battles between major forces. They're not prepared for guerrilla tactics. for hit-and-run attacks on their supply lines, for weapons that don't follow the Galactic Convention on Ethical Warfare. Sarah, Jackson said carefully, you're talking about fighting a war we can't win. No, Chen replied, her voice gaining strength. I'm talking about fighting a war they can't understand. Look at their formation. Perfect, symmetrical, aesthetically pleasing. They've arranged their forces like they're putting on a parade, not preparing for battle. Every ship in its designated position. Every squadron maintaining proper distance from its neighbors. She zoomed in on specific sections of the enemy fleet. The Zephyrian crystal ships are beautiful, but they're fragile. One solid hit and they shatter into a million pieces. The Nexari bioships are incredibly adaptive, but they need time to analyze new threats before they can respond. The Corvani stone ships are nearly indestructible, but they're slow and they can't maneuver worth a damn. You're suggesting we exploit their weaknesses, Reyes said slowly. I'm suggesting we do what humans have always done when faced with superior force, Chen replied. We cheat. We lie. We fight dirty. We use every trick, every underhanded tactic, every weapon they consider beneath their dignity. Because dignity is a luxury we can't afford. The room was silent for a long moment. These were career officers, people who had trained to fight according to established military doctrine. What Chen was proposing went against everything they'd been taught about honorable warfare. Finally, Jackson spoke. What do you need? Chen felt a fierce smile cross her face. Everything we've got and some things we don't. I want every shipyard in human space working around the clock. I want every weapon that's been deemed too dangerous or too unethical for civilized warfare pulled out of storage and mounted on anything that can fly. I want our best engineers and our craziest inventors working together to create things the Council has never even imagined. And our ships? Morrison asked. Our people? Our ships are going to become ghosts, Chen replied. We're going to hit them where they don't expect it, when they don't expect it, with weapons they've never seen before. We're going to make them afraid to sleep, afraid to eat, afraid to trust their own senses. We're going to teach them that there's a difference between being powerful and being human. She looked around the room at faces she'd known for years, men and women who had served with distinction in humanity's brief but eventful military history. I'm not going to lie to you. Most of us won't survive this. Maybe none of us will, but if we do this right, if we fight the way only humans can fight, we might just give them something to remember us by. Jackson was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Do it. You have full authorization for whatever you need. And Sarah? Yes, sir. Give them hell. After the conference ended, Chen stood alone on the bridge, staring out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Council's vast fleet was probably celebrating their inevitable victory. Their commanders were likely toasting the end of the human problem with whatever passed for alcohol in their various species. They had no idea what was coming. Chen activated the ship-wide communication system. Throughout the resilient dawn, her crew stopped what they were doing to listen. On dozens of other ships scattered throughout human space, thousands of men and women in improvised uniforms and jury-rigged vessels did the same. This is Admiral Chen, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the ship. By now you've all heard about the Council's ultimatum. They want us to surrender our independence, our freedom, our right to determine our own destiny. They want us to become children in their perfect ordered galaxy. She paused, letting that sink in. They think they know us. They think we're a young, primitive species that got lucky enough to stumble into space travel. They think our ships are junk, our weapons are crude, our tactics are barbaric. They're right about most of that. A few chuckles echoed from the crew stations. But there's one thing they don't understand about humans. We don't fight to win. We fight because fighting is what humans do. We fight when we're outnumbered. We fight when we're outgunned. We fight when anyone with sense would surrender. We fight because somewhere in our DNA is the memory of 10,000 years of warfare against everything from saber-toothed tigers to nuclear missiles, and we're too stubborn to stop now. Her voice grew stronger, carrying the weight of conviction.
In 68 hours, the Council is going to find out what happens when you threaten human children.
They're going to learn why our species crawled out of caves and conquered an entire planet despite being the weakest, slowest predators in our ecosystem. They're going to discover that crude doesn't mean ineffective, and primitive doesn't mean harmless. She looked around the bridge, seeing the same fierce determination in every face that she felt burning in her own chest. Signal all ships. We're going to give the Galactic Council a lesson in human warfare. God help them, and God help us all. The modification bays of Titan Station had never seen anything like it. Chief Engineer Patricia Walsh stood on the observation deck, watching hundreds of technicians swarm over the converted cargo hauler, defiant spirit like ants over a dropped sandwich. Sparks flew from welding torches as armor plating from scrapped starships was being bolted directly onto the hull. The ship's original sleek lines had disappeared under layers of improvised protection that made it look like a metal porcupine. "Chief, are you sure this is going to work?" asked Lieutenant Rodriguez, her newest assistant. The young man looked nervous as he watched a team of engineers installing what appeared to be mining charges directly into the ship's forward cargo bay. Walsh grinned, her weathered face creasing with dark satisfaction. "Son, 30 years ago I was jury-rigging life support systems on colony ships with nothing but duct tape and prayers. 20 years ago I was keeping our fighters running during the Centauri crisis with spare parts from kitchen appliances. If I can keep humans alive in the vacuum of space using refrigerator coils, I can damn well turn a cargo hauler into something that'll make the Council wet themselves." Below them, the defiant spirit's new weapon systems were taking shape. The graceful lines that alien ships favored were nowhere to be seen. Instead, human engineers had mounted everything they could think of wherever they could fit it. Missile launchers salvaged from planetary defense platforms, railguns that had been designed for asteroid mining, plasma cannons that were technically construction tools but could melt through most known hull materials. "The Council's ships are designed for civilized warfare," Walsh continued, pulling up the technical specifications on her tablet. "Clean energy weapons that disable instead of destroy. Precise targeting systems that avoid unnecessary collateral damage. Beautiful, efficient, and completely unprepared for what we're about to throw at them." She pointed to the mining charges being installed in the forward bay. "Those are supposed to crack apart asteroids for easy harvesting. But if you pack enough of them into a ship and ram it into something," Rodriguez's eyes widened. "You're turning it into a bomb." "I'm turning it into a statement," Walsh corrected. "The Council thinks we fight by their rules. They think war is about elegant energy beams and polite surrender demands. They've never seen what happens when humans stop pretending to be civilized." A communication chimed from her tablet. "Chief Walsh, this is Captain Morrison on the Revenge. We've got a problem with the torpedo modifications." Walsh sighed. "On my way, Captain." The Revenge had been a luxury passenger liner before the war began. Now it was humanity's newest stealth ship, its hull coated with sensor-absorbing materials that had been developed for mining operations in asteroid fields. As Walsh entered the torpedo bay, she could see the problem immediately. Captain Morrison, a former merchant marine officer who'd volunteered for military service, was standing next to a rack of modified mining torpedoes. The weapons were crude even by human standards, essentially guided explosive charges with basic targeting systems. But they had one advantage that the Council's sophisticated weapons lacked. They were completely unpredictable. "The targeting computers can't get a lock," Morrison explained, his frustration evident. "These things were designed to track mineral deposits, not enemy ships. Every time we try to program them for ship-to-ship combat, they start looking for iron ore deposits instead of hull signatures." Walsh examined the torpedo's guidance system, noting the jury-rigged components and improvised wiring. "That's not a bug, Captain. That's a feature. I don't follow. The Council's ships are used to facing weapons with predictable targeting patterns. Their defensive systems are designed to counter guidance systems that follow logical attack vectors. But what happens when they face weapons that don't follow any logic at all?" She began making adjustments to the torpedo's programming, her fingers flying over the control interface. "We're not going to fix the targeting system. We're going to make it worse. Random flight patterns. Unpredictable course changes. These torpedoes are going to fly around the battlefield like drunken bees, and the Council's point defense systems won't know how to respond." Morrison stared at her. "You want our weapons to be defective? I want our weapons to be human," Walsh replied. "Chaotic. Unpredictable. Dangerous to everyone, including ourselves. The Council's computers can calculate the optimal response to any logical threat, but they can't plan for insanity." 3 decks below, in what had once been the ship's casino, Admiral Chen was reviewing the final modifications to humanity's battle plan. The room had been converted into a tactical center, its elegant decor replaced by banks of military computers and communication equipment. The contrast between the gold-trimmed walls and the crude military hardware was jarring, but it somehow seemed appropriate for humanity's approach to warfare. "Admiral, we're receiving reports from all modification centers," reported Commander Torres, his scarred hands moving over multiple control panels. 37 ships have completed primary modifications. 15 more are expected within the next 12 hours. Chen nodded, studying the tactical display that showed human space and the surrounding Council fleet. The enemy formation hadn't changed in 3 days, a perfect spear of overwhelming firepower designed to crush any resistance quickly and efficiently. It was exactly what she'd hoped for. "Status on the special projects?" she asked. Torres consulted his reports. "The Pandora's box has finished installing the experimental plasma venting system. Captain Kim reports they can now simulate a warp core breach on command while maintaining actual ship integrity. The Ghost Runner has completed stealth modifications and is currently invisible to our own sensors. And the Suicide King," he paused. "Chief Walsh wants to speak with you personally about that one." Chen activated her communicator. "Walsh, what's the situation with our special surprise?" The chief engineer's voice crackled through with barely contained excitement. "Admiral, you're going to love this. Remember that prototype antimatter container system that the eggheads on Europa said was too dangerous to actually use? The one that could theoretically destabilize if you looked at it wrong? That's the one. Well, it turns out that if you modify it just right, you can create a delayed antimatter release that looks exactly like a standard warp core breach on sensors. The Council's ships will think the Suicide King has been destroyed and ignore it completely." Chen felt a savage smile cross her face. "How long can you maintain the deception?" "Long enough for the ship to drift right into the middle of their formation before the real antimatter charge detonates. It'll take out everything within a 50-kilometer radius." "And the crew?" "Already evacuated to other ships. The Suicide King is running on full automation now. Captain Stevens volunteered to pilot her manually, but I convinced him that was unnecessary heroism." "Good work, Chief. How long until we're ready?" "Give me 6 more hours for final checks and we'll be ready to introduce the Council to human warfare." After ending the communication, Chen turned back to the tactical display. The Council's ships were arrayed in perfect formation, each vessel in its designated position according to millennia of military tradition. They probably had detailed plans for every conventional attack pattern, every standard tactical maneuver that civilized species had used throughout galactic history. They had no plans for what was coming. "Admiral," Torres said quietly, "are you sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back. The Council will never offer us terms again." Chen looked around the room at her staff. Men and women who'd signed up to defend humanity's colonies from pirates and raiders, not to fight an impossible war against the galaxy's greatest civilizations. They deserved to know what they were getting into. "Torres is right," she said, her voice carrying to everyone in the room. "What we're about to do will change everything. The Council has ruled this galaxy for thousands of years based on the principle that civilized species fight civilized wars. We're about to prove them wrong." She pulled up historical files on her tablet, images from Earth's bloodiest conflicts, records of humanity's most desperate battles. "Our species has survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and nuclear weapons because we learned one crucial lesson. When your back is against the wall, you don't fight fair. You fight to win, and you use every advantage you can get." The tactical display shifted, showing the positions of human ships scattered throughout their territory. Each vessel was a converted civilian craft, jury-rigged with whatever weapons they could mount. Against the Council's pristine warships, they looked like toys. "The Council thinks they know what we are," Chen continued. "They see our crude ships and our improvised weapons, and they assume we're primitives playing at warfare. They don't understand that crude doesn't mean ineffective. They don't understand that the best weapon is often the one your enemy doesn't expect." She looked directly at each officer in turn. "In 18 hours, we're going to teach them that humanity didn't conquer Earth by being the strongest or the fastest. We conquered it by being the most stubborn, the most adaptable, and the most willing to do whatever it takes to survive." Commander Martinez, who'd been quiet throughout the briefing, finally spoke up. "What if we lose, Admiral? What if this just makes them angry enough to destroy our colonies?" Chen was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Then we'll have given our children something to remember. We'll have shown them that humans don't surrender, don't kneel, and don't go quietly into the dark. And maybe, just maybe, the next generation will find a way to finish what we started." The room fell silent except for the constant hum of ship systems and the occasional spark from overloaded circuits. Outside the viewport, stars wheeled slowly past as the ship maintained its position on the edge of human space. Somewhere out there, the Council's fleet was preparing for what they expected to be a routine police action against a primitive species. They were about to discover that there was nothing routine about fighting humans. "Signal all ships," Chen ordered. "Operation Crude Awakening begins in 17 hours. All captains are to prepare their crews for what's coming. And send a message to Earth Command. Tell them that whatever happens next, humanity went down fighting." As her staff bent to their tasks, Chen returned to studying the tactical display. The Council's formation was perfect, elegant, and completely vulnerable to the kind of warfare they'd never encountered. Their ships were designed for battles between civilized opponents who followed established rules of engagement. But humans had never been particularly civilized, and they'd never been good at following rules. In less than a day, the Galactic Council was going to learn why their ancestors had abandoned Earth 40,000 years ago, when humanity was still learning to make fire. Some lessons, Chen reflected grimly, could only be taught with blood. The bridge of the Zephyrian flagship Ethereal Wind hummed with quiet efficiency as Ambassador Velta reviewed the final preparations for what the Council was calling a police action. The crystalline ship's bioneural networks processed incoming data with the serene perfection that had characterized Zephyrian military operations for 3 millennia. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. Ambassador, reported Fleet Coordinator Silnath, her melodious voice carrying the absolute confidence of someone who had never known military defeat. All Council forces have achieved optimal positioning. The human fleet remains in its expected defensive formation around their primary world. Veltar nodded, studying the tactical hologram that showed the perfect sphere of Council ships surrounding human space. 3,000 vessels representing 47 species, each one a masterpiece of advanced engineering and elegant design. The humans had perhaps 200 ships, most of them converted civilian craft, with weapon systems that barely qualified as military grade. "Status of our surrender demand?" he asked. 12 hours remaining before the ultimatum expires. Our xenopsychology experts predict a 94.7% probability that the humans will accept our terms once they fully comprehend the hopelessness of their situation. Veltar allowed himself a small smile. The Council had spent considerable resources studying human psychology over the past 3 years. The species was aggressive and unpredictable by galactic standards, but they weren't suicidal. When faced with overwhelming force, even humans would choose survival over pride. "Maintain current formation," he ordered. "All vessels are to remain in assigned positions. We shall demonstrate proper military order to these young ones." What Veltar didn't know was that 60,000 kilometers away, Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison was lying on his back inside the Pandora's box, making final adjustments to humanity's most audacious modification. The converted mining ship looked innocuous enough from the outside, just another crude human vessel with too many weapons bolted onto its hull, but hidden within its enlarged engine compartment was a piece of technology that would have horrified the Council's ethicists. "Chief, are you sure this isn't going to kill us all?" asked Ensign Parker, watching nervously as Morrison worked on what appeared to be a warp core surrounded by enough warning labels to paper a small moon.
Probably not, Morrison replied cheerfully, adjusting the plasma containment field with the casual expertise of someone who'd been modifying impossible technology for 20 years.
"See, the beauty of this system is that it's designed to fail safely. When we trigger the fake core breach, all this energy gets vented into space in a very impressive explosion. From the outside, it'll look like we've been destroyed. And if something goes wrong, then we'll be very briefly and very thoroughly vaporized." Morrison crawled out from under the containment unit, wiping grease from his hands. But hey, that's what makes it exciting. The Pandora's box was just one of 50 human ships that had undergone radical modifications over the past week. In the cargo bays of converted freighters, mining charges had been reconfigured as proximity mines. On former passenger liners, civilian fabricators had been modified to produce clouds of metallic chaff that would confuse enemy sensors. Even the smallest patrol boats had been fitted with systems that the Council would never expect. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Ghost Runner, watching her stealth systems come online. The ship had been invisible to Council sensors for the past 6 hours, drifting silently toward the enemy formation, like a ghost made of metal and fury. Her crew of 23 operated in absolute silence, communicating only through hand signals and text messages. The Ghost Runner had been a deep space research vessel before the war, designed to study phenomena that might interfere with normal ship operations. Its sensor-absorbing hull and experimental cloaking systems had made it ideal for investigating dangerous cosmic anomalies. Now, those same systems would let it slip through the Council's detection grid like a whisper of death. "Captain," whispered her tactical officer, his voice barely audible even in the bridge's absolute quiet. "We're approaching the outer edge of their sensor perimeter." Zephyrian crystal ship directly ahead, bearing 017. Vasquez studied the elegant vessel through her ship's passive sensors. The luminous dawn was a thing of beauty, its crystalline hull catching and refracting light from nearby stars, its organic curves flowing like frozen music. It was also completely unprepared for what was about to happen. The special delivery, she ordered softly. In the Ghost Runner's modified cargo bay, automated systems activated. The ship's original survey probes had been replaced with something far more sinister: autonomous hunter-killer drones that had been designed for asteroid mining operations. Each drone was equipped with shaped charges that could crack apart space rocks with surgical precision. Against the delicate crystal structure of a Zephyrian ship, they would be absolutely devastating. Admiral Chen stood in the tactical center of the resilient dawn, surrounded by displays showing the positions of every human ship in the fleet. The countdown timer in the corner of her main screen showed 11 hours and 37 minutes until the Council's ultimatum expired. For the past 3 days, she'd maintained the pretense of considering their terms while her ships quietly moved into position. "Admiral," reported Commander Torres, "all assets are in position for Operation Crude Awakening. The Suicide King has achieved optimal drift trajectory. The Ghost Runner is inside their perimeter and preparing for Phase 1. Mining platforms Alpha through Gamma are ready to launch their special cargo." Chen nodded, studying the Council formation on her tactical display. They maintained perfect order, each ship in its assigned position, according to principles of military geometry that had remained unchanged for centuries. It was exactly the kind of rigid thinking that she'd hoped to exploit. "Signal all ships," she ordered. "In 60 minutes we show the galaxy what happens when you threaten human children. All captains are to remember, we're not fighting to win. We're fighting to teach them that victory over humanity comes with a price they'll never forget." Her communication officer's fingers flew over his console, sending encrypted burst transmissions to ships scattered across human space. Most of those vessels would not survive the next few hours. Chen knew that, and so did their crews. But sometimes survival wasn't the point. Sometimes you had to make a statement that would echo through history. On the bridge of the Nexari bioship Living Harmony, Nest Commander Jektar was reviewing psychological profiles of human military leaders. The Nexari had evolved from a hive species, and their ships were living organisms bred specifically for warfare. The Living Harmony could adapt to any threat, learn from any weapon, and evolve countermeasures to any attack pattern. "The human Admiral Chen appears to be stalling," reported Biocoordinator Valhas, her symbiotic neural implants processing data from throughout the ship's organic systems. "Our behavioral models suggest she is either genuinely considering surrender or attempting to buy time for some unknown purpose." Jektar examined the files with interest. Human psychology was fascinating from a xenobiological perspective, a species that had evolved as pack hunters but developed individual consciousness, creating minds that could think both collectively and independently. It made them unpredictable in small-scale situations, but theoretically manageable in large-scale conflicts. "Maintain readiness protocols," he ordered. "If the humans attempt resistance, our adaptive systems will analyze their tactics and develop appropriate responses within minutes." What Jektar didn't know was that Captain Lisa Park was at that moment making final preparations aboard the Trickster, a converted research vessel that had once studied exotic particles near black holes. Her ship's entire purpose was to create something the Nexari had never encountered, a weapon that couldn't be analyzed, adapted to, or understood. "Captain, the quantum resonance system is online," reported her science officer, Dr. Martinez. "All safety protocols have been disabled as per your orders." Park nodded grimly. The quantum resonance system had been designed to study the strange effects that occurred near the event horizons of black holes. In its original configuration, it was a purely scientific instrument, but human engineers had modified it to create something that violated several laws of physics and most principles of sanity. "What exactly is this thing going to do?" asked a tactical officer, Lieutenant Chang. "Honestly, we're not entirely sure, Doctor," Martinez admitted. "The theoretical models suggest it will create localized space-time distortions that interfere with normal matter-energy interactions. In practical terms, it should make everything within a 10-kilometer radius behave like it's drunk." "Drunk physics?" "Drunk physics," Park confirmed. "Weapons that fire sideways. Shields that protect the wrong ship. Navigation systems that think they're upside down. The Nexari's adaptive systems won't be able to compensate because there's nothing logical to adapt to." Chang stared at the readouts showing the quantum resonance system's current status. "And this won't kill us?" "Probably not, Doctor," Martinez said with the cheerful uncertainty of a scientist about to conduct an experiment that had never been tried before. "The effect should be contained within our target area. Although I should mention that there's a small possibility it might accidentally create a temporary black hole." "How small?"
Very small.
Maybe 3%. Park grinned. It was exactly the kind of insane weapon that humanity needed, something so completely unpredictable that even they weren't sure what it would do. The Council's perfect ships, with their perfect tactics, would have no idea how to respond. Across human space, similar conversations were taking place on dozens of ships. The Berserker was preparing to deploy clouds of self-replicating nanobots that had been designed for asteroid mining but could consume any metal they encountered. The Chaos Theory was charging up a modified terraforming device that would create artificial gravity wells in random locations throughout the battle zone. The Murphy's Law was preparing to launch a spread of torpedoes that had been programmed with deliberately contradictory targeting instructions. Each weapon system was crude, dangerous, and completely unprecedented. Together, they represented humanity's answer to the Council's overwhelming technological superiority. If you can't fight them with better weapons, fight them with weapons they've never imagined. Admiral Chen checked the countdown timer one final time. 11 hours and 12 minutes until the Council's ultimatum expired. Around her, the bridge crew made final preparations with the quiet efficiency of people who knew they were about to make history, one way or another. Admiral, reported her communications officer. Incoming transmission from Ambassador Veltar. On screen. The Zephyrian's elegant form appeared in the hologram, his expression showing the patient superiority of someone who had never doubted the outcome of this situation. Admiral Chen, I trust you have had sufficient time to consider the Council's generous offer. I hope you will make the wise choice for your people. Chen looked at him for a long moment, seeing in his features the absolute certainty of someone who had never faced a truly desperate opponent. Ambassador, I've made my decision. Excellent. Your surrender terms can be finalized within the hour, and... I'm not surrendering, Chen interrupted quietly, and neither are my people. Veltar's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Admiral, I urge you to reconsider. The Council's patience has limits, and the consequences of defiance will be severe. The consequences of surrender would be worse, Chen replied. At least this way our children will know that humanity faced the galaxy standing up. This is most unfortunate, Veltar said, his melodious voice carrying a note of genuine sadness. Very well, Admiral. You have forced our hand. The Council fleet will commence police actions in precisely 11 hours. I sincerely hope your people will see reason before that time expires. The hologram vanished, leaving the bridge in tense silence. All ships, Chen ordered, her voice carrying throughout the human fleet. This is it. Operation Crude Awakening begins in 10 hours and 58 minutes. Remember who you're fighting for. Remember what happens if we lose. And remember that sometimes the best victory is making sure your enemy never forgets the cost of beating you. Throughout human space, crude ships with jury-rigged weapons began their final approach toward the most powerful fleet in galactic history. None of them expected to survive. All of them intended to make their deaths count. The first shot of the war came from humanity's most unlikely warrior. The Suicide King had been drifting for 3 hours, its automated systems maintaining perfect mimicry of a ship suffering cascading system failures. To the Council's senses, it appeared to be venting plasma and losing structural integrity. Just another human vessel breaking down under the stress of facing overwhelming odds. None of the magnificent alien warships paid it any attention as it slowly tumbled toward the heart of their formation. On the bridge of the ethereal wind, Ambassador Veltar was composing what he expected to be a final surrender demand when the Suicide King reached the center of the Council fleet and detonated. The antimatter explosion vaporized the automated human ship instantly, but that was just the beginning. The carefully shaped charges that Chief Walsh had installed created a directed blast that tore through the perfect formation like a fist through crystal. The Zephyrian cruiser Harmony of Ages simply ceased to exist, its elegant crystalline structure unable to withstand the raw physics of matter-antimatter annihilation. 3 Nexari bioships writhed in agony as their living hulls were cooked by radiation, their adaptive systems overwhelmed by energies they had no evolutionary experience with. But it was the psychological impact that mattered most. For the first time in centuries, Council ships had been destroyed not by superior technology or brilliant tactics, but by a weapon so crude, so barbarically simple, that their sophisticated defense systems hadn't even recognized it as a threat. What happened? Veltar demanded, his melodious voice cracking slightly as damage reports flooded in. How did they penetrate our formation? Fleet Coordinator Silneath stared at her displays in shock. The vessel showed all indicators of system failure. Our analysis computers classified it as a non-threat, but the explosion pattern suggests deliberate antimatter deployment in a kamikaze configuration. Kamikaze? Veltar's translator struggled with the concept. They deliberately destroyed their own ship? Before anyone could answer, the second phase of Operation Crude Awakening began. Captain Elena Vasquez triggered the Ghost Runner's attack sequence while the Council fleet was still reeling from the antimatter explosion. Her ship's modified cargo bay opened silently, releasing a swarm of hunter-killer drones that had been designed to crack apart asteroids but worked just as well on crystalline alien hulls. The drones scattered across the battlefield like mechanical locusts, their simple mining sensors locked onto the distinctive energy signatures of Zephyrian crystal ships. Unlike sophisticated military drones, these crude devices followed no recognizable attack pattern. They simply flew toward their targets in erratic spirals, occasionally colliding with each other or flying off in completely random directions. The Zephyrian point defense systems, designed to counter logical missile attacks, couldn't track weapons that had no logic to their flight paths. The first drone struck the luminous dawn amidships, its shaped charge detonating with surgical precision. The beautiful crystal ship rang like a bell as hairline cracks spread across its entire structure, then shattered into a million glittering fragments. "Impossible!" whispered Silneth as more drones found their targets. "Their guidance systems are completely random. Our computers can't predict their attack vectors." That was exactly what Admiral Chen had counted on. While the Council's ships tried to deal with weapons that refused to behave logically, the third phase of her plan began. The Pandora's box triggered its fake warp core breach just as a squadron of Nexari bioships moved to investigate the drone attacks. Chief Petty Officer Morrison's modifications worked exactly as designed. The ship's engines vented their entire plasma load in a spectacular explosion that looked absolutely convincing on every sensor in the Council fleet. But instead of being destroyed, the Pandora's box used the cover of its own fake destruction to release its real payload, clouds of metallic chaff designed for asteroid mining operations. The chaff spread across the battlefield like a silver fog, interfering with sensors and making it impossible for the bioships to get clear targeting solutions. "We're receiving reports of system failures across multiple vessels," reported Silneth, her voice tight with stress. "The metallic particles are interfering with bioneural networks. Our living ships are experiencing something analogous to allergic reactions." Veltar stared at the tactical display in growing horror. The perfect Council formation was dissolving into chaos as ships tried to avoid kamikaze attacks, random drone strikes, and clouds of metallic particles that made their sensors useless. And the humans were just getting started. Captain Lisa Park triggered the Trickster's quantum resonance system as a squadron of Corvani stone ships moved to restore order. The massive rectangular vessels were nearly indestructible, their dense mineral hulls capable of withstanding almost any conventional weapon. But they had never encountered physics that had been deliberately broken. The quantum field generator created a sphere of distorted space-time 10 kilometers across, centered on the Corvani formation. Within that sphere, the normal laws of physics became more like suggestions. Weapons fired sideways, shields projected in random directions. Navigation systems reported that ships were moving backward through time. By the ancient stones transmitted the Corvani fleet commander as his ship's instruments went completely insane. "What manner of weapon is this?" His tactical officer tried to respond, but discovered that his voice was coming out of the wrong speaker and traveling backward through the communication system. The massive stone ship began rotating slowly along its vertical axis, not because anyone had ordered it to, but because the local gravity field had decided to point sideways. From her position on the resilient dawn, Admiral Chen watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. The Council's perfect formation had become a swirling mass of confusion as ships tried to deal with weapons that followed no logical principles. It was time for Phase 4. "All mining platforms," she ordered, "execute Asteroid Storm Protocol." Throughout the asteroid fields that surrounded human space, automated mining platforms began launching their cargo loads toward the battle zone. But instead of refined metals and rare minerals, they were hurling chunks of raw asteroid equipped with simple thruster systems and proximity detonators. The crude missiles flew in rough ballistic trajectories, their targeting systems designed for stationary mining operations rather than moving targets. That should have made them easy to intercept. At the Council's point, defense systems were designed to counter sophisticated guided weapons, not flying rocks that occasionally changed direction for no apparent reason. When the first asteroid chunk struck a Nexari cruiser, the bioship's adaptive hull began trying to digest it, not realizing that the rock was packed with mining explosives. The explosion tore a massive hole in the living vessel's side, and its biological systems went into shock. Similar impacts across the battlefield began taking a toll on ships that could adapt to any logical threat but had no evolutionary response to being hit by explosive space rocks. This is madness, Veltar said, his composure finally cracking as he watched his perfect fleet being torn apart by weapons that shouldn't have worked. How do we counter attacks that make no tactical sense? That was exactly the question Admiral Chen had wanted them to ask. While the Council's commanders tried to develop rational responses to irrational weapons, the human fleet began its final gambit. The converted cargo hauler Berserker released its payload of self-replicating nanobots into the battlefield. The nanobots had been designed to break down asteroid material for processing, but they didn't distinguish between space rocks and alien hull metals. They began spreading across disabled Council ships like metallic cancer, consuming everything they touched and creating more of themselves. The Zephyrian crystal ships were particularly vulnerable. Their precisely structured hulls provided perfect templates for the nanobots to follow as they consumed and replicated. Within minutes, beautiful crystalline vessels were being eaten alive by clouds of microscopic machines that multiplied exponentially as they fed. "Fleet emergency protocol," Veltar ordered desperately. "All ships are to withdraw to minimum safe distance and prepare for sterilization bombardment." But the Council fleet's problems were just beginning. The Chaos Theory activated its modified terraforming device, creating artificial gravity wells at random points throughout the battle zone. Ships found themselves pulled off course by gravitational anomalies that appeared and disappeared without warning. The massive Corvani stone ships, already confused by broken physics, began colliding with each other as their navigation systems struggled to compensate for gravity fields that changed direction every few seconds. Captain Rodriguez of the Murphy's Law chose that moment to launch his spread of deliberately contradictory torpedoes. Each missile had been programmed with multiple conflicting targeting instructions. Attack the largest ship, avoid all ships, seek the strongest energy signature, ignore all energy signatures. The result was a spread of weapons that flew around the battlefield like confused metal insects, occasionally striking targets by complete accident. One torpedo, programmed to seek the weakest energy signature while simultaneously avoiding all energy signatures, became trapped in a logical loop and began flying in perfect circles. Another, told to attack the most heavily defended target while also seeking the path of least resistance, decided that the safest approach was to fly directly through solid asteroids. The Council's tactical computers, designed to track and counter logical weapons, suffered something resembling nervous breakdowns as they tried to predict the flight paths of missiles that contradicted themselves with every course correction. "Ambassador," reported Silnath, her voice barely controlled panic. "We're receiving casualty reports from across the fleet. 67 ships destroyed, 112 disabled, and the nanobots are spreading to undamaged vessels. Our formation cohesion has completely collapsed." Veltar stared at the tactical display, watching centuries of military doctrine crumble under the assault of weapons that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. The elegant council formation had become a chaotic swirl of ships trying to avoid kamikaze attacks, random explosions, broken physics, self-replicating machines, and torpedoes that had apparently achieved consciousness and decided to rebel against their programming. "How?" he whispered. "How is this possible?" The answer came from an unexpected source. The human Admiral Chen opened a communication channel to all Council ships, her scarred face appearing on their screens with an expression of cold satisfaction. "This is Admiral Chen of the Human Defense Fleet," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the chaos of battle. "You wanted to see what human weapons could do against your perfect ships. You wanted to test our resolve against your overwhelming force. Well, congratulations, Ambassador. You're getting a demonstration of both." She gestured toward the destruction around them. "Every weapon we've used today was built from mining equipment, civilian technology, and scientific instruments. We didn't need your advanced weapons or your sophisticated tactics. We just needed something you've never encountered before. Enemies who fight without rules, without honor, and without the slightest concern for what civilized species consider acceptable warfare." The communication channels filled with static as another wave of nanobots consumed the Nixari bioship's communication array. "This is what happens," Chen continued, "when you threaten human children. This is what you get when you demand that humanity kneel. We may not have your advanced technology or your ancient wisdom, but we have something you've forgotten over your millennia of civilized warfare. We remember how to be monsters when we need to be." Throughout the Council fleet, elegant alien minds struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. This wasn't warfare as they understood it. It was chaos made manifest, violence without purpose or structure. It was everything their civilized galaxy had evolved beyond, and it was working. As Admiral Chen ended the transmission and prepared for the final phase of Operation Crude Awakening, She allowed herself a moment of savage satisfaction. The Council had expected to face a primitive species that would either surrender quickly or be crushed efficiently. Instead, they had encountered something far more dangerous. Humans who had nothing left to lose and every reason to make their deaths as expensive as possible. The war was far from over, but the galaxy's greatest civilizations had just learned their first lesson in human warfare. Sometimes the most effective weapon is the one your enemy never sees coming. The aftermath of Operation Crude Awakening hung in space like a monument to chaos. What had been the galaxy's most perfect military formation was now a debris field of crystalline fragments, dying bioships and stone vessels that couldn't figure out which direction was up. Self-replicating nanobots continued their feast on disabled council ships, while artificial gravity wells pulled the wreckage into slowly rotating spirals of destruction. Ambassador Veltar stood in the ruined command center of the ethereal wind, watching his life's work crumble around him. The flagship's crystalline structure bore stress fractures from the quantum resonance attacks, and half his crew was unconscious from exposure to the chaotic physics fields that still lingered around the battlefield. "Casualty reports," he said quietly. Fleet Coordinator Silneth consulted her damaged displays with trembling hands. 230. 7 ships destroyed or disabled. The nanobots have infected 41 additional vessels and continue spreading despite all containment efforts. Fleet cohesion is at 0%. Command and control networks have completely collapsed. Veltar closed his eyes. In 6 hours, the Council's magnificent fleet had been reduced to scattered groups of survivors fleeing from weapons that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Human losses: 17 ships confirmed destroyed, perhaps 30 damaged. Their main fleet remains intact and operational. The mathematics were staggering. Humanity's crude, improvised vessels had achieved a victory ratio that would have been impossible using conventional tactics. But then, nothing about this battle had been conventional. "Ambassador," Silneth continued hesitantly, "we're receiving priority communications from the Council chamber. They're demanding an immediate explanation for our difficulties." Veltar almost laughed. Difficulties. As if the complete destruction of galactic military doctrine could be dismissed so easily. Patch them through. The holographic projector flickered to life, showing the assembled representatives of the Galactic Council in their grand chamber on the capital world. 47 species, each one confident in their civilization's superiority, each one expecting a routine report of human surrender. High Counselor Threndai of the ancient Eldari spoke first, his 1,000-year-old voice carrying the authority of epochs. "Ambassador Veltar, the Council awaits confirmation of human capitulation. When may we expect the formal surrender ceremony?" Veltar looked around his damaged bridge, at the stress fractures in the walls and the emergency lighting that flickered intermittently. How could he possibly explain what had happened? How could he make them understand that everything they thought they knew about warfare was wrong? "Honored counselors," he began carefully, "the human response to our ultimatum was unexpected." "Unexpected how?" demanded Councillor Zexhun of the Corvani, his massive stone features carved into an expression of impatience. They refused to surrender. Instead, they initiated what they called Operation Crude Awakening. The results were, "Get to the point, Ambassador," snapped Councillor Yuthara of the Nexari. "Did you destroy their fleet or not?" Veltar was quiet for a long moment. "They destroyed ours." The silence that followed was profound. 47 of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations stared at him through the hologram, their alien features showing identical expressions of incomprehension. "Impossible," Threndai said finally. "The human fleet consisted of converted civilian vessels with primitive weapon systems. Our intelligence reports confirmed their technological inferiority." "Our intelligence was accurate," Veltar replied. "Their technology is indeed primitive by our standards. Their weapons are crude, inefficient, and constructed from mining equipment and civilian components." "Then how?" "Because primitive doesn't mean ineffective," Veltar interrupted, his voice gaining strength. "Their weapons were crude, yes, but they were also completely unprecedented. Our defense systems, our tactical computers, our entire military doctrine is based on countering logical threats from civilized opponents. The humans didn't fight logically. They fought like..." He struggled to find words that could convey what he'd witnessed. "Like what, Ambassador?" Threndai's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Like monsters," Veltar said quietly. "Like predators who learned warfare by fighting each other for 10,000 years. They used kamikaze attacks, self-replicating weapons, devices that deliberately broke the laws of physics, and torpedoes that were programmed to be insane. Every principle of civilized combat was violated. Councillor Meltis of the Peaceful Harmony spoke up, her musical voice trembling with shock. "You're describing total war, unrestricted warfare. Such tactics have been banned for millennia. The humans never signed those bans," Veltar pointed out, "and I don't think they would have honored them if they had. These are not civilized beings fighting for civilized goals. They're survivors fighting for the right to continue existing, and they'll use any means necessary to achieve that goal." The council chamber erupted into chaos as representatives of dozens of species began speaking at once. The Eldari demanded immediate retaliation. The Corvani wanted to analyze human weapons for potential military applications. The Harmony called for emergency peace negotiations. Through it all, High Councillor Threndai remained silent, his ancient eyes studying Veltar's image with growing comprehension. Finally, he raised his hand for silence. "Ambassador, what is the current status of the human fleet?" Veltar consulted his tactical displays. "Intact and advancing. They've divided their forces into smaller groups that are moving to attack our supply lines and isolated ship formations. Their tactics remain completely unpredictable. And our fleet? Scattered. Many ships are fleeing toward council space to avoid the nanobots. Others are trapped by artificial gravity wells. The few remaining operational vessels are trying to coordinate some kind of defensive response, but our command structure has collapsed." Threndai was quiet for a moment, processing implications that were reshaping his understanding of galactic civilization. "Ambassador, in your professional opinion, can this conflict be won using conventional military doctrine?" "No," Veltar answered without hesitation. "The humans have made it clear that they won't fight by our rules. Any attempt to defeat them using traditional tactics will result in more disasters like today. They've turned warfare itself into a weapon against us." The council chamber fell silent again as the galaxy's leaders contemplated a reality they'd never imagined, that their perfect civilization could be threatened by beings who refused to be civilized. Meanwhile, Admiral Chen stood in the tactical center of the Resilient Dawn, watching the council fleet's retreat with professional satisfaction. The first phase of Operation Crude Awakening had exceeded all expectations, but she knew the real war was just beginning. "Admiral," reported Commander Torres, "we're receiving surrender requests from 14 council vessels. They're requesting amnesty in exchange for immediate withdrawal from human space." "Granted," Chen replied without hesitation. "Make it clear that any ship leaving our territory will be allowed to pass safely, but also make it clear that any vessel that returns will be considered hostile." "Yes, ma'am. We're also receiving communications from the remaining council ships. They're trying to establish some kind of defensive perimeter near the edge of our space." Chen nodded. The council's military commanders were good at their jobs, and they'd eventually find ways to counter some of humanity's unconventional tactics, but by then, the damage would be done. The galaxy had seen what happened when you threatened human children, and that lesson wouldn't be forgotten quickly. "Signal all human ships," she ordered. Phase 2 of Operation Crude Awakening is now in effect. All vessels are to break into independent hunter groups and begin asymmetric operations against council supply lines and isolated formations. Remember, we're not trying to conquer their space. We are trying to make them afraid to enter ours. As her crew bent to their tasks, Chen allowed herself a moment to consider what they'd accomplished. Humanity's crude fleet had done the impossible. They'd defeated the galaxy's greatest military force using nothing but improvised weapons and tactical insanity. But more importantly, they'd proven that Earth's children wouldn't go quietly into the dark. The communication system crackled to life, and Admiral Chen found herself facing a hologram of Ambassador Veltar. The elegant Zephyrian looked exhausted, his perfect features showing stress fractures that matched those on his ship. "Admiral Chen," he said quietly, "I believe we need to talk." "I'm listening, Ambassador." "The Council is prepared to discuss revised terms for human integration into galactic civilization, terms that would preserve your species' autonomy while ensuring peaceful coexistence with Council members." Chen studied his face carefully. "You mean you're ready to negotiate instead of dictating?" "Yes. And what exactly does the Council consider acceptable terms for coexistence?" Veltar was quiet for a moment, consulting notes that appeared on his personal display. "Full recognition of human sovereignty within your current territorial boundaries. Establishment of formal diplomatic relations. Mutual non-aggression pacts. And implementation of new protocols for military engagement that account for your species' unconventional warfare capabilities." Chen almost smiled. "You want us to promise we'll fight fair next time. We want to ensure that there won't be a next time," Veltar replied honestly. "Admiral, What your fleet accomplished today has fundamentally changed the galactic balance of power. Every species in Council space is now aware that conventional military superiority doesn't guarantee victory against an opponent willing to ignore the rules of civilized warfare. Good, Chen said simply. That was the point. The Council is prepared to offer humanity a permanent seat in galactic government with full voting rights and representation proportional to your territorial holdings. In exchange, we ask only that you agree to abide by the established conventions of interstellar conflict. Chen leaned back in her chair, considering the offer. It was more than humanity could have hoped for 6 hours ago, recognition as equals rather than subjects. Territory that would be respected rather than administered. But there was one problem. Ambassador, those conventions were written by species that had already achieved galactic dominance. They're designed to prevent warfare, not to protect the rights of smaller civilizations. What happens to the next species that gets a visit from a council fleet offering them protection? Veltar's expression showed that he understood exactly what she was asking. The established order had worked well for the council because it preserved their power and prevented challenges to their authority. But humanity had proven that the established order could be challenged, and that knowledge changed everything. The Council is prepared to revise the conventions, he said carefully, to account for the rights of independent species and the principles of self-determination.
In writing.
With enforcement mechanisms, and with human observers to make sure those principles are actually followed. Agreed. Chen nodded slowly. It wasn't complete victory, but it was more than any species had ever extracted from the Galactic Council through military action. More importantly, it established the principle that civilized behavior had to be reciprocal. That advanced civilizations couldn't demand compliance from younger species without offering respect in return.
I'll need to consult with my government, she said finally.
But Ambassador, there's one thing you should understand clearly. Yes, humanity will honor any agreement we make, as long as the Council honors it as well. But if you ever again threaten human children, if you ever again demand that we kneel or surrender our independence, you'll get a reminder of what happened here today. Except next time, we'll be better prepared, and you'll have even more to lose. Veltar nodded gravely. I believe the Council understands that now, Admiral. As the communication ended, Chen turned to look out at the stars where her Crude fleet was hunting the scattered remnants of the galaxy's most powerful military force. Humanity had won more than a battle today. They'd won recognition that strength came in many forms, and that sometimes the most effective weapon was the willingness to use weapons that civilized beings would never consider. The galaxy would remember this day. They would remember that humanity's Crude fleet had humiliated the Galactic Council in a space war, and they would remember the lesson that came with it. Never underestimate a species that learned to fight by fighting itself for 10,000 years. And somewhere in the depths of space, human children would grow up free, knowing that their parents had faced impossible odds and won. Not through superior technology or ancient wisdom, but through the simple refusal to surrender what mattered most. The Crude had conquered the elegant, and the galaxy would never be the same.